It was February 2023, and I was in a bit of a dark place. Life hadn't been kind lately, and I needed some air, some space to think. The woods about 20 kilometers south of Krakow, with their mysterious black lake, had always been a refuge for me. On a rainy afternoon, I decided to take a walk there, a decision I would later come to regret. The rain had slowed to a mist by the time I parked my car on the edge of the forest. The air was damp, and the earthy scent of wet leaves filled my lungs. These woods were vast, dense, and ancient. I had walked here before, but always from a familiar path that led directly to the lake. This time, I decided to take a different route, approaching from the other side. After nearly 2 hours of navigating through the undergrowth and weaving between towering pines and bare oaks, I found the Black Lake. Its dark waters looked more like oil than water, reflecting the overcast sky and ripples. It was hauntingly beautiful, but something about it unsettled me that day. I couldn't place it, just a feeling in my gut, a prickle on the back of my neck. Still, I pressed on, circling the lake and losing myself in my thoughts. Eventually, I reached a rest stop I recognized, a small clearing with a bench and a crude wooden sign. The sight comforted me, and I sat there for a while, watching the light fade behind the thick canopy. I hadn't realized how late it was getting. By the time I stood up to leave, the forest was already shrouded in twilight. I felt a pang of unease. I knew these woods were home to wild boars, and they didn't hibernate. The thought of stumbling upon one in the dark quickened my pace. I headed back toward a path I thought would take me to my car, but as I walked, I began to hear whispers. At first, I dismissed them as the wind weaving through the trees, but they didn't sound like the wind. They sounded human. Two voices, low and hushed, as if they were having a secret conversation. I stopped, straining to make out words, but I couldn't understand them. The language was foreign, or perhaps just too faint. The whispers seemed to come from deeper in the forest, pulling me toward them. Curiosity mixed with fear, but I told myself it was probably other hikers. Maybe they were lost too. I ventured closer, my footsteps careful and deliberate, but as I drew near the source of the voices, they stopped. Dead silence. No whispers, no rustling leaves, no distant bird calls, just the sound of my own breathing. I scanned the darkness around me. There was no one there, only the trees, their gnarled branches reaching like skeletal hands. The unease in my chest grew into a cold knot of dread. I turned back the way I had come, only to realize I was completely turned around. The path I thought I was following had disappeared, swallowed by the forest. Panic set in as I stumbled through the undergrowth, trying to find any sign of the trail. My phone's GPS was useless. The dense canopy blocked the signal, the darkness thickened, and every shadow seemed alive. The whispers returned, closer this time. My pulse pounded in my ears as I whipped my flashlight around, illuminating nothing but trees. Hours passed. My sense of direction was completely gone. I tried to keep calm, but the whispers persisted, sometimes circling me, other times fading only to return louder and sharper. At one point, I thought I saw a figure in the distance, a pale shape slipping between the trees. I called out, desperate for help, but no one answered. The figure vanished. After what felt like an eternity, I saw a faint glow through the trees. With every ounce of strength I had left, I pushed toward it, emerging onto a dirt road. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived when I realized I was 12 kilometers from where I had parked my car. Exhausted and soaked from the rain, I began walking along the road, hoping to flag down a passing car. Eventually, a truck approached. I waved it down, and the driver, an older man with kind eyes, rolled down the window. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. I explained my ordeal, and he shook his head, muttering something about how foolish it was to wander these woods at night. He drove me back to my car, his headlights cutting through the misty darkness. As I climbed out and thanked him, he looked at me seriously and said, "Next time, don't go looking for that lake. These woods have stories, you know. Not all of them end well." I nodded, too drained to respond. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that those whispers, those shadows, weren't done with me. Even now, when I close my eyes, I sometimes hear them, faint and distant, calling me back to the Black Lake. It's funny how bravado fades when you're deep in the woods and the sun starts to set. 6 years ago, my two friends Artem and Kolya and I decided to go camping in the thick woods near the Dnipro River in Ukraine. We had all grown up in Dnipro City, but none of us were seasoned outdoorsmen. That weekend, though, we had this urge to get away from it all. Phones, noise, the usual grind. We pitched our tents in a clearing about a day's hike into the forest. The place was stunning. Tall pines, the scent of earth and resin, and complete silence except for birdsong. By dusk, after some grilling and a few beers, we were laughing, swapping childhood stories, and feeling pretty invincible. But that night, Kolya swore he heard something walking around our campsite. "It's just a deer," I said, dismissing it. He didn't press the matter, but I noticed he slept with his flashlight in his hand. The next morning, we packed up and decided to hike deeper into the woods. Our plan was simple: head north for a while, and eventually loop back to the trailhead. Easy enough, right? Except it wasn't. By late afternoon, we realized we were lost. Somehow, we'd taken a wrong turn and wandered far from any recognizable trail. Artem's phone had no signal, and Kolya's compass was missing. "Let's keep moving. We'll find the river," Artem suggested. It sounded logical. The Dnipro is massive. We figured we'd hit it eventually. But as the sun dipped lower, the trees seemed to press in closer. The woods took on an oppressive feel. Every snapping twig made us jump. By nightfall, we were still wandering. We decided to set up camp in a small clearing and wait for daylight to get our bearings. Kolya's mood had gone sour. He was muttering about hearing strange noises again. I wasn't going to say it out loud, but I felt it too. There was an unnatural stillness around us, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Then came the rustling. It was faint at first, like something brushing through the undergrowth. Artem shined his flashlight toward the sound, but we couldn't see anything. "Probably an animal," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The rustling stopped. For a long moment there was silence. And then Kolya screamed. He was staring into the trees, his face pale. "There's something there!" he shouted. Artem and I turned our flashlights in the same direction. At first, all I saw were shadows and tangled branches. But then something moved, a figure, pale and gaunt, with limbs that seemed too long and a face. Or maybe it was just the lack of one. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, melting back into the darkness. "Did you see that?" Kolya was practically hyperventilating. Artem grabbed his arm. "Calm down," he said, though he sounded as shaken as Kolya looked. We decided to keep the fire burning and take turns keeping watch. It was a long, tense night. Every sound made my pulse spike. Around midnight, we heard something, a low, guttural sound, like a growl or a deep moan. It came from all around us, echoing through the trees. Kolya begged us to leave, but where would we even go? Wandering aimlessly in the dark seemed like suicide. Just before dawn, the thing came back. Artem was on watch when he screamed, waking Kolya and me. It had crept closer this time. I caught a better look, pale, skeletal, and its movements were jerky, almost insect-like. It darted toward us, faster than anything I've ever seen. Our team swung a stick at it, and Kolya threw a rock, but neither of those seemed to faze it. It grabbed Kolya by the arm before Artem tackled it with everything he had. The creature let out a high-pitched shriek and disappeared into the woods again. Kolya's arm was scratched up, but not seriously hurt. As soon as there was enough light to see, we left everything behind and ran. We didn't stop until we reached a dirt road, hours later. A farmer driving a beat-up truck found us and gave us a ride back to civilization. We didn't talk much on the ride home. What was there to say? None of us had a good explanation for what we'd seen. Kolya's arm healed, but he still has faint scars. Artem and I drifted apart not long after that trip. And me? I've never set foot in those woods again. Even now, years later, I still dream about that night. I wake up hearing that growl, feeling those eyes on me. Sometimes I wonder if whatever it was is still out there, waiting. And sometimes I wonder if it's looking for me.